Hello everybody, it's Wyvern here with this week's Total War Warhammer 2 multiplayer tier list. And it's going to be a bit of a shorter one this week because the faction we're covering is the forces of Brettonia. And obviously, it's a bit of a limited faction. There's not too many units the roster focuses on, and many of those units are somewhat redundant. So without further ado, going to be hopping in with their chivalrous king himself, and that is Lewin. And Lewin is going to, for me, net himself a tier. I think he's a very strong lord. He's got great bursty debuffs with the Sword of Couronne. He's very sustainable. Lion's Shield that basically lets him ignore magic and missile damage for a period of time. He's got built-in physical resist. He gives him map-wide frenzy when you drop him below 50% HP. And due to the fact that he regens, he can really work with any caster. And obviously, Brettonia doesn't have the greatest selection of magic. You've only got beasts, heavens, and life. So that's maybe not as impressive of a feat as it is on, say, Boris. But Lewin himself is just such a strong combatant and such a solid support character as well that I think he easily nets himself an A tier. There are very few matchups where Lewin is not a good choice for the Brettonians, though I do think he tends to get a bit overshone by the next lord on the list, and that is the Fey Enchantress. I think the Fey Enchantress is an easy S tier, and really one of the almost backbreaking lords for enemy factions in a lot of matchups. Being a Lore of Life caster with Arcane Conduit and a Mortis Engine effect, and almost complete immunity to magic, especially when mounted on Silvaron, is just insane. Her resistances give her an insane amount of survivability, far more than you would expect just looking at her stat card, where she's kind of a mech combatant with very low armor and HP. She's got almost, especially when mounted on Silvaron, you're looking at 60% magic resist. She's got the baked-in 15% missile resist, plus 20% physical resist for Blessing of the Lady. Throw in a Paladin alongside her for Guardian, and the Fey Enchantress is an absolute beefcake. She's incredibly tanky, far more than you'd expect. She's a dirt cheap Mortis Engine with 95 speed, which is pretty bonkers. Probably a bit overtuned, might be a bit underpriced, or perhaps the synergy with Paladins is a bit strong. Personally, I'm more in the latter camp, that Paladins, or her synergy with Paladins is just a bit strong. But her Mortis Engine effect can really bust entire matchups. The fact that she can drain away your opponent's infantry, throw her in with some anti-large support like Gotrek or Paladin, and she is an absolute juggernaut. Melts elves like nothing because they're very low HP pools, of course. Even not bad against dwarves, because she will eventually melt away their infantry, and her magic resist makes her pretty powerful against the more common lord options you see in that matchup, especially like Grumbrindle. You'll often see Gotrek as well for the dwarves, so her magic resist actually makes her very, very beefy against that, and just an all-around powerful lord. Only real downside maybe is Chalice of Potions is a bit I don't know if I'd say iffy, but Chalice of Potions, it is a bit unreliable. It is, after all, basically a common of Cassandora, and I don't think she necessarily synergizes the best with super wide builds, because life is better off supporting elite compositions. So really, when you bring the Fey, you'll often be bringing her for the Mortis, but you're accepting the fact that you bring a slightly suboptimal Lord Magic. I know people tend to hype up life magic for how powerful it is, but in my opinion, if you're trying to go with a very wide Brettonian build, it can often be more beneficial to actually bring a Prophetess. And I think the Fey being locked into life is a little harmful there, but really, she's just such a strong lord, has such strong utility. The melee attack debuff, the mist, her near indestructibility against certain enemies, her ability to run away from trouble, and her relatively cheap price, it just combines to give you an absolute powerhouse of a lord. Next up, we do have Bordalo. And I think Bordalo is actually a solid choice. I said this before on the last tier list, I believe, that I think he's one of the more sort of underrated characters. For the longest time, he was a meme tier lord, and it was fair to position him somewhere in D or F tier or whatever. But I think right now, he certainly doesn't have the universality of someone like Lewin or the Fey. You can bring Lewin or the Fey in almost any matchup, if not any matchup. Honestly, the Fey Enchantress is probably... trying to think if there's a matchup where the Fey is genuinely not a good choice. And I don't really think there is. I think you can make a case for the Fey in any matchup. I think there might be somewhere she's mildly suboptimal, like maybe against Norska or against Chaos. You might want somebody else more. You might want Lewin or actually Bordelot in those matchups, but she's just so universal. And Lewin is rather universal as well. Bordelot, not so much. Bordelot has a clear niche. He's got a great AoE, melee, or leadership and bonus versus large buff, which synergizes stupendously well with Royal Hippogryph Knights. The fact that you do need to bring Lore of Life for him means that he kind of limits your caster options. He doesn't have the same survivability as Lewin does. He doesn't have the same combat stats, but he has insane burst. He gets Heroic Killing Blow, which boosts that damage output by 50%. He can really charge in, chunk an enemy. He's kind of like a mix of a Karl Franz, but instead of Karl Franz's bursty buffs, he provides a burst of, or a consistent slew of buffs to nearby troops. And then you've got of course, you do have the Trident of Manon, and that can quickly clear out an enemy infantry formation. I love it against Norska, because against Norska, you'll often find yourself fighting on top of, say, Fimir and Mammoths, and you want to clear out some Marauder trash very quickly. Bordelot can get the job done there. The minus 16 leadership, the discouraged effect on Trident is excellent, and it can make or break certain matchups. It's actually one of the reasons I also like him against Greenskins, for that matter, because you can really break more elite formations quickly. Which does bring us on to budget Joan of Arc, and she is not getting that glowing of a report here. I think she's definitely one of the weaker characters, definitely on the lower end of the scale. Part of the problem is that Brettonia does already have some very strong combat lords, and she doesn't bring too much new to the table. She doesn't have a monster's mount. She doesn't have the greatest mobility. As discussed a bit in Fixing the Forgotten, she also doesn't necessarily have the best itemization. Some of her items, like Halo Maidenly Wrath, could be a little bit better. Perhaps she could have a little bit more HP or something along those lines. She just doesn't bring the same level of utility that Bordelot or Lewin especially bring. She basically just brings a sustained combat character who's fairly cheap, but she's not a win condition. She can't apply terror. She doesn't have a discouraged effect. She doesn't have an insane amount of burst or an insane amount of survivability. She's basically just a budget lord option with some slight buffs. And ultimately, I think she's a D tier, maybe even hovering towards F because of that. Not because she's just terrible on her own, but I think there's very few matchups where you really want her over Bordelot, and there's very few builds where you want her over Bordelot or Lewin. You're generally going to be better off, especially with Louis. She does have a little bit of a niche, I think, against Dwarves, where her solid combat stats, bonus versus infantry, and sustained boosts to melee attack and defense make her synergize relatively well with foot Squires. But even there, I think there's a case that she's probably second fiddle to someone like Lewin or Fey Enchantress. She's not sort of peak choice against Dwarves. And so she's always going to be sort of a very, you're going to run very specific and niche strats with Reponse. You're also kind of locked into life magic almost, because you need to bring Felix to support her because she doesn't have any healing of her own. One of the reasons she does actually work okay against Dwarves, because you can synergize her with Felix, and Felix provides you with the sustain that she needs. But being essentially locked into Lore of Life a lot, it doesn't help her case either. And even if you do bring her sub-faction, you're probably going to be better off bringing... and we'll actually skip the Prophetess for a second here. You're actually better off bringing the Lord. And this is the sole reason the Brettonian Lord even makes D tier. In my opinion, if the Brettonian subfaction of Lyonesse didn't exist, this guy would be an easy F tier. It wouldn't be a contest for me, because this guy's garbage. He's literally just a crappy version of Bordelot. Even worse than the Empire General, where the Empire General, there's like specific, very, very specific Empire builds where you can utilize the General's cheapness to get away with basically not having a Lord. Brettonia has other excellent cheap options. You've got the Prophetess. You actually do have budget Joan of Arc, who's okay. Fey is actually fairly cheap. You can bring her on foot with just Mortis effect and like 2 spells or something if you really want to. And she's a very cheap Lord option. Brettonia has other cheap Lord options, so the Lord has no real function there. The only real reason to have him, and the only real reason why he makes D tier, is because if you run Lyonesse and you want a double Hippogryph build, you bring this guy to get you a second Hippogryph. And while he is a budget Bordelot, he is a budget Bordelot. You get a Hippogryph Lord and a Hippogryph Hero in. And while I don't really think that's a justification to put this guy very high on the list, that is an incredibly niche combo, not really something you're going to do very often, blah, 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 blah. I do think it is a niche that he is exclusively in, and so that puts him up to a very low D tier in my mind. And then the Prophetess, who I actually like a lot. I know she's kind of underrated, and a Lore of Life Prophetess isn't very good, in my opinion. It just gets completely overshadowed by Fey Enchantress. But if you want to go with a very wide build, or you want to go with something a little, especially wide builds, but if you want to go with something focusing on dropping some Manticore summons, or dropping some Amber Spears, and you don't want to invest in a super wide formation, or a super expensive Lord, plus a caster, you just want to focus on a big army, then the Prophetess is the way to go. And so much like Bordello, she's kind of one of those niche lords or specific instance lords, but she has it's still a fairly broad application. If you bring Lore of Heavens, you can go with a incredibly wide build, bring a lot of questing knights, which are horrendously undercosted. You can bring a boatload of archers, peasants, trebuchets, etc., and you have an excellent cheap lord that's fulfilling your lord slot and giving your magic, and that can come at the cost of like 1100 gold or something. You can have a dirt cheap Prophetess, and she gets a B tier there because she doesn't really bring much unique. She gets the Salt of Stone, I guess, the Aura of the Ladies kind of garbage, as we discussed in Fixing the Forgotten, but yeah, it's just she's a cheap caster lord, and that's never an outright bad thing. That's always going to have a purpose for making those wide armies that are built around troops rather than heroes or lords. Next up, moving into the hero category, we are going to kick things off with the Green Knight. And this guy's a little bit of an oddball, definitely hovering for me somewhere between D and C tier. He's definitely not an excellent pick, but he does have a niche, and he can be a win condition. The fact that he has insane physical, well, I shouldn't say insane, he's got ethereal physical resist. That's kind of what you'd expect. He has very good sustain if he's in the woods. He's got solid combat stats. Some factions very much struggle to kill this guy. Vampire Coast, which is normally a brutal matchup for, and actually, no matter what you do, really, it's going to be a brutal matchup for you as Brettonia. But Green Knight is one of the few aces in the hole you have in that matchup because he's so hard for Coast to actually kill. They do not have great options to counter him. And for that, he does get himself at C tier. I think it's going to be a very low C tier as we start fleshing things out. He's not going to stay very high, but I think he's got this little niche application. He can hunt enemy lords and heroes. He can bog down a flank a bit. I like him against Dark Elves because Dark Elves don't have great access to magic damage. Their only real options are Doomfire Warlocks, which get melted by rails, so you almost never see them. And then you've got like a Medusa, which isn't really going to hit this guy, and then it's magic essentially. And you're not really going to see most of the Dark Elves don't often bring the tools to really crack the Green Knight against Brettonia. So he can kind of run in like a moron, tank a bunch of damage, allow your trebuchets to do work, harass enemy lords for eternity. His magic damage means he bypasses, for example, Malekith's physical resistance, and while certainly not a sort of a top tier duelist, maybe because he doesn't have the most excellent combat stats, despite being like the greatest knight ever. He's just a very sustained presence and a difficult presence to remove. Beastmen don't have the best of times against him. As mentioned, the Dark Elves don't. Dwarves actually struggle to kill him, though. Their tendency to have a character with strong magic damage makes that a bit risky. Yeah, there's matchups where he can really shine, but I think an easy C tier for him there is fair. Moving on to Felix Yeager as well as Gotrek. Bit of a debatable one, and I'm sure on these two, and I'm sure some people will argue back and forth where exactly they should fall. I personally think Felix deserves either a very low C, probably a bit under Green Knight, or a high D. I think he has a niche supporting Reponse. He has a niche, no matter what, I think, against Dwarves, where just the fact that he's an AP, anti-infantry, cheap character is a winning combo right there, but especially for a roster like Brettonia's that doesn't have too many options in that department. He can support a character like the Fey or Bordello in a traditional Gotrek sort of Fey blob. Sometimes you'll see Paladin thrown in there, though usually it's Paladin, Gotrek, Fey, but occasionally you'll see Felix thrown in with alongside either Paladin or Gotrek, and then like Fey Enchantress or something. And I think that's a little bit of a niche he's got there. He can just provide sustained combat power in a Brettonian Doom blob. Not the most amazing character for Brettonia. but he does have these niche applications, and I think it's a little bit broader of an application than, say, what Rapunzel or the Brettonian Lord has. He's not locked into one specific build, matchup, and situation that happens once in a blue moon. You can apply him to a few different matchups. You can throw him in against Tomb Kings, you can throw him in against Dwarves, you can throw him in against Coast even, though that can be a bit risky there. There's a few minor matchups where he can perform, so I think he gets himself a low C. Gotrek, however, is a excellent character, and whether he should belongs in A or S tier for Brettonia is very difficult to judge. I think I'm going to put him at a very high A. I think there are certain matchups where Brettonia just doesn't really need Gotrek. You don't really want him against Dwarves, of course, because he's magical and anti-large, neither of which is relevant in that matchup. You don't really want Gotrek against, in my opinion, he's not that great against Wood Elves, though Brettonia has such an advantageous matchup with Wood Elves still. It's not the biggest issue. But honestly, in most matchups, he is a very respectable, if not amazing choice. In Tomb Kings, he is single-handedly one of the primary reasons. The Tomb Kings Brettonia matchup is pretty darn even. Stack him on top of Paladin, who's just an undercosted melee combatant with Guardian, especially in quick match. I do believe that's been changed now in banner rules. So you can't have Guardian with a Paladin, but he becomes a very tanky with Fey Enchantress heal spam. He can just dish out an insane amount of hurt for how cheap he is. Even against factions like Empire, because of how much you're compromising their backline as Brettonia, this guy can just grind them down. Empire is very much relying on its cavalry, usually in that matchup, and its characters, and especially with the knockback changes, Gotrek can just beat the crap out of Empire characters and cavalry. Same thing with High Elves. He can deal with their single entities and chariots very, very efficiently. He's just a powerhouse character. And while you don't necessarily see him all the time, much like Lewin, I think he's a very, very solid choice, and you will see him the vast majority of cases. Moving on, or you'll see him at some point, I would say, in the vast majority of matchups. Against Beastmen, he might be a bit overkill against what you normally see, and does tend to get ground down by the chaff spam, but really easy A tier in my opinion for this guy. Moving on to the Paladin, this guy's going to get himself an S tier, one of several horribly underpriced Brettonian units. And I know somebody's going to come out arguing that Brettonia is underpowered or Brettonia is too niche or has too niche of a roster that they must have horribly underpriced units. I don't agree. I play a lot of Brettonia myself. Paladin's definitely one of those units that's just kind of underpriced. Probably should cost a little more combat stat for the combat stats he provides. He's a respectable combat hero. The fact that he gets Guardian on top of that is a bit ridiculous, I think. But he's an excellent character. You'll see him in almost every matchup, at least one of them, just to provide support for Fey or Lewin. The extra 15% of his physical is insane. His combat stats are excellent. You take two Paladins and they can even pressure someone like Luther relatively effectively. Put them on a Pegasus and they cost less than 1,000 gold. I believe it's only 875 gold for a Paladin on a Pegasus, stripped down, which is pretty nuts for such an effective flying character. So easy S tier for these guys. You will see them in the majority of matchups. Once again, Dwarves are kind of an exception, but I don't think there's many, if any, matchups where you will not bring at least one Paladin, or where there isn't a mainline build where you will see. Obviously, there's always the off meta or different off builds that might not include a Paladin. Everyone's got their own style, but you could justify a Paladin in basically every matchup. Easy S tier. Moving on to the Damsel, obviously there's the whole, it's the only caster hero option, and if you want to run a non-caster lord, yay, but I don't think the Damsel is particularly great. It doesn't get blast, instead you get scroll shielding, which in some ways is a bit weaker than the blast on Empire Sorcerers. Obviously she doesn't have Arcane Conduit, her Winds of Magic generation not too hot, and her spell selection, or her magic lore selection is kind of trash. You're stuck with 3 lores, Beasts, Life, and Heavens, all of which, Life obviously very strong, but Heavens and Beasts obviously having a lot of lackluster spells. So unfortunately she gets herself a B tier here, and I think that might be a bit generous. Maybe in C is more fair. It's obviously comparing her to other casters, but within the context of their roster, you could probably say just about any caster is S tier because you'll see them in any build that doesn't have a caster lord. But I think for Brettonia, who has excellent caster lord options to begin with, plus the lackluster lore selection and the lackluster itemization, I think, plus lackluster mount options, you're stuck with a unicorn or a horse, or I believe bard warhorse, like options you basically never bring. You basically always bring her on a horse. Maybe on a unicorn if you want to negate miscast damage, but you don't get a Pegasus mount like, say, an Empire Wizard. So for me, Damsels are like a low B tier as far as casters go. Definitely nothing to write home about. And finally, Fat Henry. And this guy is a bit of an oddball. He's a very respectable character. He's a Paladin, essentially, with AP, because you can throw him on a Hippogryph. He's got a Paladin on a Hippogryph. There's nothing wrong with that. That's actually very powerful. But, big but, he is locked into Repons de Leones's faction, which is incredibly limiting. I really do wish this guy was in the general Brettonian faction. I think it would spice things up a bit and free up Brettonian build selection a little bit. But all that aside, the fact that he's limited to just Leones is crippling for this guy. It takes what would probably be like an A tier character and drops him down to what's probably a low C or even D. I'm going to put him at a low C because I think that you can bring him into a variety of Leones builds. You kind of give it away that you're going to bring this guy when you pick him. But you can bring him in a variety of different Leones builds. The fact that you can get an extra Hippogryph in there is definitely nice. You can have a Lord level caster plus still have a terror-causing single entity on the field, which is nice. So a very low C tier for him. The fact that he's locked into that subfaction is just crippling, especially because that subfaction lacks the strongest Brettonian Lord options. 3 of the B through S tier Brettonian Lords aren't not in his subfaction, so it's just kind of hard for him. Sucks to be Big Henry, but yeah, in my opinion, would be an easy A. Low C is where he ends up, just because of nicheness. Moving on to Infantry, we got Peasants, and who doesn't love the Peasantry? Easy S. Is there a Brettonian build you ever see that doesn't have 5 Peasants? At 100 gold, this is one of the best speed bumps in the game. Very mobile, trash leadership, but who really cares? Trash combat stats, of course. Probably the least egregious of the disposable chaff units as far as their prowess goes, but when taken in context of the generally underpriced Brettonian roster, they're definitely a bit of an sort of annoying presence just because of how easily they can swarm enemy lines, block up enemy rushes, and just act as roadblock. And you'll basically see 5 peasants in every single Brettonian build. There basically isn't a matchup where you're not going to see it. And they only have one purpose, disruption, and they do it well for dirt cheap gold. So yeah, S tier. Disruption and damage soaking, I guess. Men-at-Arms, a lot less glowing of a report for these guys. For me, I think normal Men-at-Arms are probably going to find themselves at a D tier. You're almost never going to bring these guys unless you happen to have some weird gold situation, which I feel like you'd rather bring spells or items or abilities. You can bring them if you want sort of a little extra disruption. Like I said, it's more of a, if you happen to have the gold left over and you're fighting a faction where you're not really anticipating large. But I think that even then, these guys probably might even belong in F tier, because they don't really fight well enough against infantry to justify. These guys just really don't have much of a niche. They don't really fight well. I'll put them down at D tier. If you want a somewhat fightier front line, very low D tier. If you want a somewhat fightier front line, and you don't have the money for shields on like one unit, you might bring these guys. But the thing is, these guys just do not outtrade enemy infantry effectively enough to justify them over peasants, really. And at the same time, they can't hold up large. They don't have bonus versus large. They don't have charge defense against large like spears do. And so as a cheap second-rate holding tool, they do not do the job. And so they're D tier, whereas Spearmen at Arms, I think, probably deserve themselves a C tier. I still don't think they're an excellent unit, but you will see them somewhat often as a filler, especially in matchups where you are not expecting or anticipating heavy cavalry presence, or sorry, heavy sort of enemy. I should say like enemy and just I haven't sure how to put it, but they're just a good sort of tier up roadblock from peasants. And in matchups where you're expecting some lightly armored, heavy, large stuff, these guys can do an okay job. They'll just stall, hold the line. They'll provide your knights with a base to fight around when they're fighting against, say against vampire counts. You want a spear base to put down on your knights to support them against zombie spam, and against blood knights. These guys are the men at arms for the job. They can disrupt, they can hold the fort, they'll do okay against, say, minotaurs for their cost. Obviously not great for that, like they'll win or something, but for their cost they'll do rather well. Just solid disruptive holding force there. Men at arms with shields I think are much better. I think in matchups where you're anticipating an enemy spear line, these guys can perform okay. Give them a B tier here, because they're not just a holding force, they're also there to do a little bit of chip damage. They can do a little bit of chip damage against dwarves, they can do a little bit of chip damage against zombies, they can do a little bit of chip damage, I should say vampire coast zombies, do a little chip damage against tomb kings, skeletons, against wood elves and high elf spearmen. They'll do some attrition damage. They're just a decent unit for that. Their combat stats are good enough to where they can grind all right, even if not excellently well. And they've got silver shields, so they can soak shots for days. So very, very good upgrade for just 75 gold over normal men-at-arms. These guys just spike up in viability. And I think they're a rather respectable unit. Low B tier for them in my mind. Just because there's several Brettonian builds where you don't even bother with the front line, really. So that's why men-at-arms might not be as common as you might expect, but still a respectable unit. Spearmen armors with shields, I think, on the flip side, are probably a little bit of a lower tier unit, actually. Because if you're going to do a cheap sort of backline or second-rate backline, you're probably going to bring the unshielded spears. I think these guys are like a low C, where these guys are a higher C. If you're going to go with a very cheap holding force that can still punch back a little bit, you're going to go with unshielded spears in a lot of cases. Otherwise, if you're going with a semi-legit front line, you're probably looking to actually trade okay into the cheap enemy infantry, whether those are zombies or spears for higher wood elves or whatever the case may be. And in that case, you do want those men-at-arms with sword and board. And you don't really want to be paying for spearmen to have shields. If you have any spearmen, they're probably covering the back line. You can get unshielded spearmen and almost peasants for the same price. So just an interesting shift here, I think, that you see with the shielded versus unshielded versions. Moving on to polearms, these guys, ever since their buff, have become a lot more viable and valuable, I think. I actually, not entirely sure where I'd position them. Personally, I use them quite a bit. I think there's still a bit of a developing strategy to how to use these guys to the best effect, but they've just gotten so much cheaper that automatically makes them a lot more viable. And I think for me, they do give themselves a respectable C tier. They're a solid holding unit against factions like Brettonia, well, actually, if you're doing a mirror matchup, they're not terrible against Brettonia itself, but against factions such as Norska, Chaos, Lizardmen, Vampire Counts, these guys can be thrown in. They can be counted on to dish out a little bit of AP damage. Nothing impressive, but a little bit of AP damage. And just function as a bit more of an effective speed bump. Against Empire, you put them in your second line to help manhandle Demigryph Knights, for example, because they will dish out quite a bit of hurt to that heavily armored Empire Cav. And of course, since the rest of your roster is kind of underpriced, you can afford to bring some slightly more elite spear variants, essentially. And it's kind of like bringing zombie polearms. They just will do that chip damage to more heavily armored cavalry or monsters that you might see. And they can pay off in certain matchups. I think for that, they do deserve themselves a C tier. I think their low leadership still does let them down a bit. Their low combat stats are still not great, but they're definitely a viable and usable unit that can find itself doing quite valuable work on the battlefield. Less so the Grail Relic, and as mentioned in Fixing with the Forgotten, this unit's kind of fallen off a lot. It does still have a little bit of a niche as a mix of a cheap tar pit and can be used to prop up your artillery pieces and your archers a little bit. Peasant Bowman and Trebuchet crews into rout at the drop of a hat. The Grail Relic can kind of prevent that. You can keep your troops in line, and it's kind of cheap. It's not really cheap, but it's cheaper. So it gets itself a D tier. it's not a great unit. Um, it's not an amazing unit, but you will see it. It does have this little bit of a niche. It can be used to prop up a polearm box if you need it against, say, lizardmen. Far from ideal, but I do think it has niche applications still. I just wouldn't recommend using one. That is it.
What are you doing?
Next on the list here, we do have the Battle Pilgrims, and this is another bit of a, I would say, niche unit, but probably nets itself another sort of C-ish tier. I think it's a solid unit against Tomb Kings. It's a solid unit against Vampire Coast. It can, if you do a bit of a rush build, work against Empire. It's just a solid unit when you're trying to deal with lightly armored, lowish melee defense infantry. The lightly armored thing especially. They can even have a bit of a niche against, say, Witch Elves. And I think, against Dark Elves, against Dark Elves they can beat down the lower end Dread Spears, Bleak Swords, trade well into Witch Elves, and while they don't win against Blackrock Corsairs, I believe they will at least damage them a decent amount. Though usually I do prefer the Regiment of Renown as an anchor in that matchup. But for me, I think they do probably net. I think I put them a little bit beneath polearms and spears, but I do think that they're once again one of those units where there's a handful of specific builds where you will find them very useful. They're the only Brettonia infantry with a really stable leadership value at 80, plus they get frenzy, so they're very, very reliable. They're going to stick around to the bitter end, essentially, even though they might not be unbreakable. However, obviously not the best combat stats, a little bit slow, which is one of the things I kind of wish they would rectify or change, but definitely a respectable combat unit. And it has its niche applications if you want to crump some squishy troops, though. Usually with Brettonia, what you end up with is like 5 peasants and a horde of Knights Errant or Knights of the Realm if you really want to fight a lightly armored faction. But against factions like Beastmen, against factions like Dark Elves, factions such as Vampire Coast, Tomb Kings, these guys can really mulch that cheap, trashy infantry quickly and allow you to get at the important targets that you need to deal with. Or perhaps provide support for your cavalry, where your cavalry might need to rapidly break through somewhere. These guys can ensure the cavalry gets that breakthrough they need. If your opponent invested, for example, in Ushapti Great Bows and Spearmen, then and you in turn invested in Battle Pilgrims and Knights of the Realm, it's a similar expenditure on your part. But your combination, if used correctly, should be able to win, since your Battle Pilgrims should be able to grind through those Skeleton Spears. Knights of the Realm, in turn, can either wait outside until the Ushapti Great Bows are open to attack, or they can charge in once the spears are bogged down by Battle Pilgrims, that sort of thing. Foot Squires, a unit that is odd, a little bit like Greatswords. I think they're one. I shouldn't say strong matchup, but their one more viable matchup is against the Dawi, where they can chew through Dwarf Infantry given the time to do so. However, I think they've got a handful of niche applications against Empire. They can be okay. I actually don't mind them against Tomb Kings, much in the same vein as Empire Greatswords. They will trade okay into, say, Tomb Guard. They'll trade okay into... They'll do some damage. I shouldn't say they'll trade okay into, but they'll do some damage to big monster troops just because they do have armor piercing, if nothing else. And one of the cool synergies that I enjoy personally is against Dark Elves. I really like to bring these guys to counteract Blackguard. Not because by themselves their stats aren't good enough to counteract Blackguard, but you throw in Fey Enchantress to provide the favor of the Fey on one unit of these guys. Their stats get spiked up to 70-ish melee attack, and you are golden. They'll suddenly chew through those units because they do hit very hard. They've got the 35 weapon strength plus, I believe it's 10 bonus versus infantry, so they're very, very strong against. They hit very, very hard for how cheap of a unit they are, and just drop a favor of the Fey on them, and their performance becomes disproportionately better. But it's not a unit you want to spam anywhere except against dwarves. I think I'd probably rate it again as similar to Battle Pilgrims. They've got their niche strong matchups or stronger matchups, perhaps a little undertuned still, but they can perform. Regiment Renowned Battle Pilgrims. I like these guys. I think they are probably a unit that I personally at least use more often than any of these other more elite Brettonia infantry. I like them as an anchor. I like them for having magic damage and fire damage. They can mulch squishy infantry. They'll beat down, I believe they'll beat down Tomb Guard in a 1v1. They will grind under Witch Elves very, very quickly. They're excellent against Dark Elves. If I'm not bringing Battle Pilgrims, there's still a good chance I'm bringing these guys. Obviously, they've got no shields, so that makes them a bit riskier. But if you're able to screen them, these guys can put out the work against Norska, where they'll drag down Skin Wolves with their fire damage and magic damage. They screws a lot of the Norscan roster over in a sustained combat. And they're borderline unbreakable with 90 leadership. Just a really solid unit. It's just that the Brettonian meta right now doesn't really focus on trying to use infantry. You don't really try to use them in most of your builds. But if you want an anchor, or if you're going to use them, if you're going to go for something more infantry heavy, I really do like the Holy Wardens of Mycental. I think they're excellent. Now, this was a unit that I voted very highly on my last tier list, and since then I've kind of come around to being less of a fan. I also think the meta shifted a bit. There have been introductions to the Brettonian blobbery options that have kind of obsoleted these guys, and what I used to consider one of their strong niches as an anchor and support for especially Fey and her Mortis effect. I feel like these guys have kind of fallen off since then, because now you've got Paladin with actual Guardian, you've got Felix in there, you've got much cheaper pole arms, which you can chevron up to get essentially a comparable performance versus a lot of factions, that sort of thing. And unfortunately, has downgraded these guys in my eyes. That plus the general shift in Brettonian meta to a what frontline build has also not helped. I think they're probably low C, if not outright a D tier. They can still grind okay. The problem is the rest of the Brettonian army tends to fall apart. They're not amazing against infantry, but not terrible either. They're a bit worse than, say, Chaos Warriors or something for the cost, I would say. Chaos Warriors with halberds, of course. I do think they probably need some mild tweaks, but they can still perform rather well as an anchor. They can still perform rather well against a faction like Empire or Vampire Counts, just to drag cavalry down, because for their cost, they are rather effective at that. It's one of those things to keep in mind that while, yes, they are not the best of units in their function, they're also only an 850 gold unit on a roster that is so cost effective like Brettonia's. And I keep saying that over and over, but it is something that I think people need to keep in mind, or bear in mind, when you're looking at certain units in the Brettonian roster, that if you happen to have a unit or two that are a little overpriced, it generally doesn't matter, because at the moment, most of your builds are saving a boatload of money elsewhere because you've got so many underpriced units elsewhere. So it's not necessarily the worst thing ever. I think against Chaos, they can be an okay anchor. I do think they can be used rather well against Empire, as long as you can protect them a little bit from enemy artillery fire. But they can definitely, once again, much like pole arms, they can drag down demigryphs, that sort of thing. And they'll trade better into, say, a unit of great swords or Empire halberds than a unit of men at arms with pole arms would. They're just a staple anchor and a respectable, if not amazing, unit. Their lack of, say, magic or fire damage or burst against squishy troops definitely limits them, because you'll often see fairly cheap enemy front lines, since people don't really want to overinvest. And these guys simultaneously can't really handle big, heavily armored infantry themselves, like Chosen, which is usually, you'll see either people go with a token front line of their own against Brettonia, or they'll go super elite. And these guys don't shine against either of those two, but they can function as an anchor, and they can perform valuable support work when utilized correctly. Moving on to Peasant Bows, bit of a mixed bag here, but all of them are very solid in my opinion. First off, we've got vanilla Peasant Bowmen. Honestly, you could make a case that both Peasant Bows deserve themselves an S tier. I quite possibly would. I'm going to keep them at an A tier. You're almost always going to see Peasant Bowmen in Brettonian builds. However, they are not Pox Bowmen. They do not apply a dirt cheap and stupidly efficient poison effect, so you won't always see them. Sometimes you'll just see people bring like 1 or 2 Pox arrows because that's all they want. They just want the poison support. That said, Peasant Bowmen are dirt cheap, and have excellent range stats for their cost. Obviously, you're paying for that by having terrible leadership and terrible combat stats and terrible HP and blah, 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 all that stuff. They break it in a stiff breeze. But for their cost, they can just mow down enemy monsters. They can mow down enemy cavalry formations, infantry, whatever you see, you name it. They can kill it with just sustained fire. And because they're so cheap, you can afford a decent holding force to stall for these guys to do their work. The one big killer for him is that Brettonia doesn't have great armor sundering effects, so they struggle a bit against armored targets. But throw in Lewin with his Sword of Corone, throw in a Curse of the Midnight Wind from a caster, and boom, you are looking at minus 60 armor. These guys melt face. Fire arrows, bit less of a good unit. I still enjoy them. I still like bringing them in quite a few matchups personally. They do in fact outperform normal bows and pox arrows against armor up to 100, because that is how much of a gap there is in how much non-AP damage they do. But and they will in fact kill quite a lot of units faster, an entire volley faster than you would expect. So I actually don't mind them against Vampire Counts. I don't mind them against Vampire Coast. If I can make the money in my list, I will try to do so just to get a handful of Fire Arrows, Vampire Coast, Vampire Counts, Tomb Kings. Honestly, all three undead factions they do rather well against Wood Elves, of course, with fire damage, still a very solid option. I actually don't mind them against High Elves. You're not really relying on your Peasant Bows to shut down Phoenixes or Dragon Princes. If you're doing that as Brettonia, you're kind of screwed up somewhere else already. But at killing High Elf Infantry, these guys do perform a bit better. So for me, they get themselves a rather easy low B. I'm sure some people would argue that these guys don't even belong in C and probably belong in D. I just like them. I like the extra damage. I think it's one of those things that gets underrated and undervalued quite a bit, but it can make a big difference in specific matchups and builds. And for me, they're worth it in a lot of cases. So low B, high C is probably where these guys stand. Pox Arrows, S tier. The second of the unholy trifecta of meta Brettonian units. Peasant, Pox, and Questing Knights. And these guys, of course, and that gives away where those guys are coming. But these guys are just an absolute menace right now. The poison changes means that these guys can apply poison to anything within 160 meters with no risk of poisoning friendly troops. One of the best poison units in the entire game right now. Poison missile units, I should say. And it can provide sustained damage at the same time. Cost 450 gold. Dirt cheap for their performance. Just an excellent, excellent, excellent unit. Probably going to get, I would assume, is going to get nerfed at some point. Or Brettonia's Wombo combo here is going to have to get nerfed at some point. But a really, really strong unit. You probably should bring at least 2 or so in every build. As mentioned, they're very low leadership, HP, and sort of melee stats means that they do route very easily. So you probably want a reserve Pox Bowman, or at least 1, maybe 2, if depending on how your money ends up when you're doing your build. But it is worthwhile to have at least a handful of these guys in every build, just so that you can debuff enemy troops and apply some consistent damage output over the course of the game for very, very low cost. If you're not running at least a few Pox Arrows in your Brettonian build, you're probably building wrong. And that's not a exaggeration. Mounted Yeoman, they've improved a lot since where they were before. Got a massive across-the-board boost to stats. None of the stat changes in and of themselves were massive, I should say, but added up because they got slight up tweaks in literally just about every stat category. It made them a lot more competitive. And I still don't think they're a great unit. I still think they're probably a low C or a high D, but that just boils down to the Brettonian roster and how it's designed. Usually you're going to try to squeeze in the budget-heavy cav in the form of the Knights Errant before you try to squeeze in these guys. But they can still perform a valuable function, chasing Empire skirmish cavalry. They can chase Dark Elf skirmishers and harass them, be a nuisance that way, try to screen them, screen against Skaven a little bit, soak charges for your cavalry potentially if you can't get peasants into position for it, harass beastmen a little bit, that sort of thing. They can do some work, certainly not an ideal unit. They could try to shut down weapon crews against dwarves. They cost 400 instead of 700 like Knights Errant, so it is a difference. Not an excellent unit by any stretch of the imagination, but I think a fairly priced unit for what it does. It's just on the Brettonian roster. You bring so much cav and so much cheap infantry that these guys get a little bit lost in the mix, but they've got their function, they've got their purpose. and I think they do deserve themselves a high D or low C. And I'm sure some people are a bit confused by my tone here. It's just that there's certain perception around some units, and in some cases, I just have I have my personal biases towards units or against them, and it does make me a bit happy to see Mounted Yeoman finally get a little bit of moment in the sun and be a little bit viable. Because for the longest time, these guys were pure garbage, and to be able to use them even for some very niche functions and not feel like you're just wasting gold and throwing it down the drain is very, very nice. Knights Errant, a really good unit. The only reason, and honestly, all of Brettonian cavalry is really good. They just all are. There's just certain Brettonian cav that is gooder than others. But Knights Errant, very, very solid unit. In my opinion, can net themselves somewhere between a high B and a low A. I'm going to give them, I think, a low A is probably most fair, because you will see that a handful of Knights Errant, granted, usually, maybe high B, because you'll almost always see the Regiment of Renown, really. But Knights Errant, you'll see them used as filler in builds that are centered around questing knights, because they are very cheap but still heavy cav. They still have enough armor and shielding and a shock value or shock damage to where they are still an okay heavy shock cav, but they're so cheap. So you'll see them as filler in questing knight centered builds. You'll see them as filler in Grail Knight centered builds. They're filler in Knights of the Realm and like very wide Brettonian builds. Arguably, you'll very often see these guys there. The one downside, in my opinion, is the more I talk about them, the more these guys belong in A. Their combat stats are not necessarily the greatest. Definitely, as far as mid-tier cavalry goes, these guys are basically just standard. People often will point fingers at one specific medium cav and scream about how OP it is, but really medium cost heavy cav tends to be, or low cost heavy cav really tends to be excellent all around. Obviously there's Cold One Riders, there's Knights Empire Knights, Knights Errant, Black Knights. All these units are very, very good, and these guys are just another example of that. And just great at disrupting backlines. They can still punch a bit into enemy infantry because they do have over 50 charge bonus and 30 weapon strength, so it does add up, and they can hit fairly hard for just how cheap they are. Fairly mobile with over 70 speed. They have some armor, cost peanuts essentially, and so they get themselves an easy A tier. You just use them as a filler, something to soak up enemy charges, something to disrupt enemy backlines, crush enemy archers, soak missile pressure for your better cav, that sort of thing. Knights of the Realm, a unit that is also very, very solid in my opinion, and really would probably be even solider were it not for just how overwhelmingly good questing knights are. But a unit that in my mind does get itself an easy high A tier or high B tier. Very good against Wood Elves, respectable against Empire, respectable against Tomb Kings, decent against. Really, there's no matchup where these guys are outright. There's very few matchups where I'd say these guys are not great. I think they're not good against dwarves, obviously, because they lack AP. But they're a bit too pricey, and you're paying for anti-large, and they're just a bit too pricey for their performance there. And the lack of AP does hamstring them a little bit against factions like Chaos, or against a faction like Chaos, or even Vampire, or even a faction like Vampire Counts, for example, where you might have to fight Blood Knights. It becomes a problem, that lack of AP. Against High Elves, the fact that they don't perform that well against, say, heavy halberd lines does become a little bit of an issue. Plus the fact that questing knights are just so overwhelmingly good hurts them a bit there. But the fact they are shielded, they are cheap, they aren't paying for AP at all, can make them very nice against a faction like Beastmen, where they can just run amok and do insane damage. A cheap and disposable way to screen out Wood Elf archery and buy time for your Grail Knights to get into engagement range. Can be used to support a lot of heavier cav or better cav very, very effectively. And unlike Knights Errant, who kind of soak a charge and die for it, but won't do too much to enemy heavy cav. Knights of the Realm will actually be punching a bit. So if you throw these guys in and get some demigryphs alongside, say, some grails or some questing knights, these guys will be punching a bit. Not super heavily. Armor's still going to shrug off a good chunk of their damage, but it's much better than Knights of the Realm, Knights Errant, because they just do have the better combat stats. Questing Knights, you guys have already heard me rant and rave and sort of talk these guys up. They're an easy S tier. Arguably, in my mind, the most overpowered unit on the entire Brettonian roster, the most underpriced unit on the entire Brettonian roster right now. I'm just going to put them up. I'll put them, I don't know, Fey's really strong too. I'll put them here, almost top of S tier, right alongside Fey. You can debate mentally where they belong. They're essentially a 1,300 gold cav that costs 1,100. Oftentimes you'll see builds where people bring like 4 of these guys. So then your entire army costs probably 800 less than it should. Brettonia is obviously a cavalry-centric faction. They've got major limitations in certain areas. It's to be expected. The cavalry is a little underpriced to compensate because they're such a one-trick pony. However, when that one trick is just so overwhelmingly underpriced, it becomes an issue. That's what we're seeing with Questing Knights, unfortunately, and the synergy they've got with very cheap peasants and fox arrows. Questing Knights are just amazing. There's basically not a matchup where they're truly bad. Even against Wood Elves, now that Wood Elves actually have some armored units to worry about, these guys are decent. Beastmen might actually be the worst matchup for Questing Knights because their AP is kind of worthless there. Bestigors, I guess, and Gorbles, but you really don't need them. But yeah, easy S tier. Basically good in almost every matchup, even against Vampire Coast, even though it might not seem like they're an excellent choice there. The fact that they're immune to psychology and have AP damage to fight crabs is actually invaluable there. Though they're certainly not a top tier choice in that matchup, they're still a viable choice in that matchup. Good against Dwarves, amazing against Empire, very good against High Elves, Dark Elves. Functional against Wood Elves, even though that's probably not their best matchup there. Any cav faction, these guys are excellent. Great against Lizardmen, great against Chaos, very solid against Norska, where they can tear apart Fimir. Just a really, really strong unit. Overall, easy S tier. Probably the single most underpriced unit on the Brettonian roster. Yeah, easy S. Grails, the one-time king of the Brettonian roster, definitely been taken down a notch, perhaps, over time, as Questing Knights have just skyrocketed to the top, in my opinion. But Grails are still a very, very solid unit. I would put them a little bit above Knights of the Realm at B tier. Obviously, excellent charge bonus. Immune to Vigor means they scale insanely well through battle. They're still the bane of all elves. Their high charge bonus just allows them to crush the low HP on the elves. Of course, magic damage bypasses the physical resist. They themselves are pretty beefy due to their own physical resist. Once again, very few matchups so they don't shine, but being an elite cavalry that costs 1,500 gold and can lose models to Spirit Leech does become an issue. Their lack of AP does also hurt them in matchups against factions such as Chaos or Lizardmen, where you might still bring 1 or 2 Grail Knights just as a support tool and something to help you long term because they do have that immunity to Vigor, but they are not sort of a mainstay of your army. They're a support tool that you just bring a handful of. Obviously, Silverin Guard and the magic resist auras that have been implemented have made these guys a little less good. Still, though, easy high B in my opinion. Could probably argue that these guys are a low A. And I'm sure you could argue that a lot of the Brettonian cav could be shunted up a bit on the roster right now. Grail Guardians, definitely not as high up. This is probably the sole Brettonian cav that's not that amazing. Not really their fault. It's just melee cav. It's not that good, and Brettonian roster is much more about just shocking their way through their opponent and swarming them and overwhelming them quickly rather than grinding as much. And if you're going to grind, you're going to go with a super budget blob like Fey, Gotrek, Paladin. That said, these guys still do have a niche as a bodyguard anchor unit, and I think for that purpose, they deserve themselves a mid sort of C tier. I still enjoy doing a classic Fey blob with Grail Guardians at times. I still love dropping a Favor of the Fey on them and watching them hack their way through infantry without problem. I still do like them for their immunity to Vigor and insane combat stats. You throw them into an elite halberds, and these guys will hold the line for ages. They will just grind and grind and grind, and until there's 2 Grail Guardians left, and then they're still grinding and fighting. So really good unit. Easy C tier for me. But obviously very, very niche. I like them against Wood Elves still. I do still enjoy using them against High Elves. They can be a fun choice against Beastmen. but certainly not a unit you're going to see all the time or all that often. The Knights Errant Regiment of Renown, I think, does get itself a top of A tier, bottom of S tier almost pick. Very solid unit. Silver Shield, basically Knights Errant on crack. 150 gold more buys you Frenzy, tier 9 stats, and Silver Shield. They're Knights Errant that hit really hard. Excuse me there. Knights Errant that hit even harder and are even tougher to kill for not too much cost increase. Just an excellent unit. Basically do what Knights Errant... They kind of linger in a weird interim spot between Knights of the Realm and Knights Errant, where they're already punching hard enough to be a valid threat, and they're already hard to rout, but simultaneously they are still a bit cheaper, and so you're not as concerned about losing them or throwing them away. And of course, Silver Shields is a unique but incredibly beneficial perk to have. It means they can shrug off a lot of missile pressure, means they can pursue units much more effectively. If you need to shut down some more wagons or throw them into a dwarven backline, these guys will endure a little bit better than their comrades, vanilla comrades. So I think they do get themselves a high A. Very tight competition, but I think you will see these guys in the majority of Brettonian builds. Knights of the Lionhearted, another unfortunate that's kind of gotten overshadowed by their by Questing Knights. Since these guys were kind of budget Grail, they kind of linger in an awkward position between Knights of the Realm and Grail Knights, and that also happens to be the turf of Questing Knights when it comes to cost. Questings are 1100, these guys are 1200. They got some oddball perks, Fear and Encourage, neither of which is that spectacular or useful. But they do hit very hard. They do have magic damage. They've got fairly good stats. Essentially budget Grail Knights is the way I envision them. I do like them in specific matchups against Wood Elves, for example, or against Beastmen, where you don't want the AP of Questing Knights, but you do want those slightly better stats. I do very much enjoy these guys. I think they've definitely got their purpose there. Sometimes if I just can't afford Grails, but I wanted a Grail unit, I will bring these guys just because it is 300 gold cheaper. If I'm just trying to squeeze in another unit, perhaps, or whatever the case may be, I may downgrade some Grails to Knights of the Lionhearted. I do think it's a rather narrow niche, some lightly armored factions and certain budget cut situations, but I do think they deserve themselves a C tier. Companions of Cannel, I think, have downgraded to an A tier. I think these guys are still underpriced, but not as much as they used to be. I think they've really reached a more fair position over time, because 1500 where they were before was really bonkers. Now they're up to 1600. I think it's become more of a fair price. Still an excellent, I'd probably put them at like a low A now. Still an excellent unit, still one of the best anti-large cavalry in the game. They've got AP, 10 bonus versus large, physical resist, fire resist, just in case that physical resist wasn't enough. They'll crush Hippogryph Knights. They're really good against Empire. They're solid against Chaos. They're solid against actually High Elves. But you do have to be very wary of Spirit Leech because they will lose models. They are obviously tankier than Questing Knights, but not that much. It's only even physical resist really in combat stats. So against missile pressure, they can still suffer a lot. Artillery can decimate them really, really badly. You obviously don't want these guys against dwarves because you don't want to be paying 400 more or 500 more gold for a unit that is so much more vulnerable to artillery, to cannons and organ guns. It's just gonna get deleted that way. Obviously not really something you want, in my opinion, against Wood Elves, where they become an easy magnet for focus fire. So I do think they're actually more niche than their regular brethren, just because they're no longer that insanely underpriced, but still a very good unit. And against vampire counts, even against vampire counts, chaos, beastmen, just because of the bonus versus large, they can shine. Any dark elves, high elves, empire. I think these guys are all still a very, very strong choice. And there's probably a good half or so of the matchups where these guys are still top tier choice. Lizardmen, of course, among those. Norska, they're solid. Just a very good unit. Mounted Yeoman, not a huge fan. Just very expensive for fairly low damage over time. But I do know some people enjoy using them and get some decent value out of them. I'm going to give them a low C, or low mid C, I guess. Probably somewhere around Fat Henry's position. I don't know. Yeah, they can do chip damage over time, but as Brettonia, you're usually not too worried about your backline being compromised, which kind of undermines one of the big reasons to run Skirmish Cav in the first place, is being worried about getting overwhelmed. Brettonia because you've got cheap peasants, cheap questing knights, and even if you didn't bring peasants, you've got cheap men-at-arms and cheap light cav to support it, or light heavy cav, I don't know, cheap heavy cav. You don't really worry about your backline too much. Knights Errant will run off silly dogs, effectively. So, undermines a unit like Mounted Yeoman a bit. They could still be a decent kiting tool. They can still definitely put on the pain against a faction like Dark Elves or Beastmen who struggles to counteract them efficiently otherwise. But I don't think they warrant much above a C tier. It's definitely not a unit you're going to see in the majority of Brettonian builds. And the same can be extended to their Regiment of Renown, which I think is even more niche. I do occasionally like using these guys with hypermobile builds against Beastmen in particular, which is why I'm giving them a little bit of a leeway here and giving them a D tier. It's just because having super mobile poison when I'm investing in an almost all cavalry or flyer build, I do enjoy that, but ultimately it's just a much pricier mounted yeoman. It's a unit that's kind of overpriced for what it does. It's literally just a yeoman with poison, but 50% more expensive. Compare Glade Riders to Glade Riders with Hagmane Tips and the cost gap there. These guys definitely don't got the benefit. They kind of got screwed, and there's not much of a purpose to them over pox arrows or anything like that. Which does bring us on to what could be argued to be Brettonia's specialty, or unique specialty, and that's flying cavalry. I know cavalry is considered their niche, but they're not the only faction with cavalry by any stretch, but they are one of the only faction that really has flying cavalry at the moment. You can make some case for Rippers or whatever, maybe, but still, they're definitely kind of a top of the line flying cavalry faction. And yeah, we got Pegasus Knights. I think a decent unit and definitely underrated. I like using them. I like using Pegasus Knights against Brettonians, or not against Brettonians, against Dark Elves. I like using them against Beastmen in particular, those more lightly armored factions. I do enjoy using them. I actually like using them against Vampire Coast. I think it's one of their very strong matchups. They're fairly cheap, fairly efficient, anti-large. Certainly a niche unit. Certainly not a unit you're going to be spamming left, right, and center and see in every matchup ever. But they deserve themselves, in my mind, an easy C tier, and because they do have a purpose there. And so because you can use them very effectively. They can run down a unit like Scourge Runner. They can run down Centaur Horse because they're just faster. They can hunt down Luther, pressure Luther Harkon, pressure bats, or gun bats in the skies, that sort of thing. They've got a niche. Royal Pegasus Knights, similar to these guys, but unfortunately, they fall into an uncomfortable situation where they're just a bit too expensive for the advantage they provide. I do still enjoy using them a little bit against Dark Elves, and I still enjoy using them against Dark Elves, and I still do enjoy using them against Beastmen. But you do need Lifecaster to support these guys, unlike Pegasus Knights, where you can kind of just use them as expendable cav, or expendable cav. That's one of the beautiful things about Pegasus Knights, Questing Knights, Knights of the Realm, Knights Errant. They're all expendable cavalry, really. You don't have to worry about making sure you brought Lore of Life to support them. So Royal Pegasus Knights, if you didn't bring Lore of Life, you're going to have a bad time. And not really get your money's worth. So a lot of the time. So while I do enjoy using them, I do enjoy having that immunity vigor in the long term. Unfortunately, I think bottom of C tier, upper D tier is really the only place I can put them at, and feel confident in the decision. Because they're basically just a Pegasus Knight, but narrowed to a much smaller niche. Royal Hippogryph Knights are, in my mind, or maybe I'll give them an upper D. I think that's probably more fair. Royal Hippogryph Knights, however, these guys I like them a lot. Personally, for me, they'd probably make an A tier because I use these guys a lot, but I also use them in matchups. Other people don't necessarily think they're that good, and even I myself don't always think they're that good. I personally would probably put them at around a B tier. They're very good against Lizardmen, in my opinion. They're very strong against Chaos. They're very strong against Norska. Even if you just bring one or two of these bad boys, that can be enough. They're, well, usually you probably not bring more than two, but even if you should bring one of these guys, it can be enough to snipe out Fimi or pressure mammoths, that sort of thing. They're very nice against Empire, where they can shrug off cannonballs and tear apart demigriffs very quickly. While Questing Knights will certainly win and arguably the most threatening build Empire faces is just a horde of questing knights backed up by pox arrows. The threat of Royal Hippogryphs is very real, and Royal Hippogryphs can bust a line much faster than questing knights can, because they just do hit much harder and they can pick their engagement much better, since they can just pick a rear charge somewhere and run your Hippogryphs over from behind. Especially if it's double Hippogryphs, it becomes really, really nasty. So definitely a powerful unit in their own right. Fairly priced, very expensive. Matchups where you'd think they might be good, like Tomb Kings, they get undermined by the way their HP pool and thresholds end up. Bone Giant, for example, decimates these guys, so you don't really want them against Tomb Kings. Unless you got some insane micro. But they can help a lot against Dwarves, they can help a lot against Empire. Always strong against, I always like bringing a unit of these guys against Beastmen if I'm doing an air heavy build, just because I want the terror. Just a respectable unit overall, and I do give them MB. Which does bring us on to the last two units here, the artillery pieces. I'm sure everyone's thrilled to see where everyone's favorite stone throwers are sitting. Vanilla Trebuchet, another easy B tier in my mind, maybe even a low A. It's just so cheap and efficient, and an easy way to get your attacking requirement fulfilled. Will trade cost effectively with cannons of most races except Empire. Can be used to whittle down enemy infantry formations. Chew down cavalry over time. Just a very, very solid unit. I'm probably going to give the Trebuchet a high B, probably the highest B unit. It can work in most matchups, really. It's just so cheap that you bring one and you're already forcing your opponent to move most of the time. And even if you aren't, they'll chip them down. You can spread your Trebuchet. You can bring multiple Trebuchets, spread them out, take advantage of how mobile Brettonia is as an army to have multiple Trebuchet batteries and pick your opponent apart over time. They take one Trebuchet out in the meantime, getting torn apart by two other Trebuchets, that sort of thing. It's much more doable for Brettonia than other factions because you just have such cheap support tools. Blessed Trebuchet, this might be a little bit of a controversial pick. It's a unit I very much enjoy nowadays because the splash on this unit is massive. It will crush enemy artillery crews very quickly. It will wreck Empire artillery crews, for example, very, very nicely. And the magic damage on the missiles and the high single target damage actually matters. Specifically against Empire and High Elves, it allows you to bust boxes of Phoenix Guard much more easily, and it allows you to tear open Empire Demigryphs much more effectively. I also like them against Empire Coast because against Coast you cannot simply rout the crew, you have to kill the crew. And so the conventional Trebuchets kind of fail there because they don't kill the crew that quickly. Trebuchets, Blessed Trebuchets with a high splash actually do. So I do actually enjoy them. I find them like that's a respectable unit. I think they're a high C for me. I actually really do like them. I'll put them at a high C. And that is it for my list. No F tiers for Brettonia. Of course, there are some where the argument could absolutely be made, and I completely respect that. Brettonian Lord is garbage besides this one subfaction pick. I'm sure everyone has their opinion on various units, but Brettonia is definitely a faction that kind of, at the moment, is defined by a handful of units up in S tier, but has a lot of very viable and very useful units, I think, that hover between A and C tier. And a lot of units that just have these niche applications and let you run some spicier or more varied builds and experiment with composition a bunch. And those units tend to get overlooked a bit just because of how super powered those top units are. And there's still a handful of units on the Brett roster that could be pushed up and made better. But this is where I'd rank them. As always, leave your thoughts, opinions, comments, and critiques down below. I'll respond as soon as I can. Do thank you all for watching, and we'll see you all in the next one. You guys have a good one.